Good afternoon. My name is Judy Kruger, and I have the honor of introducing our speaker today. But before I begin, I'd just like to mention how many luncheon speakers bring so many people who love them. This beautiful table is filled with Ginger's friends and her mom, Judy Gurley, who are here to love and support her. So would you please give a round of applause and welcome them? I've known our speaker today about 7 or 8 years. However, I have to confess that I heard about her children before I knew her because my daughter came home from school one day and announced, "There's a cute new boy in 6th grade and his name is Grayson Gilbert." And I can only tell you this now because they became friends and now they're in college. I later learned that Grayson had an older brother named Boston and 3 younger sisters named Bella, Annalise, and Aspen. Annalise and Aspen, by the way, are identical twins, and no matter how long I know them, I will never be able to tell them apart. I would later learn that the mother of these 5 children is Ginger Ravella. Ginger went to Texas Tech University and married her college sweetheart, Troy Gilbert. Troy was a United States Air Force F-16 pilot who lost his life in a plane crash while saving the lives of over 20 other soldiers in Operation Iraqi Freedom. At the time of Troy's death, their children were aged 9, 6, 3, and 9 months. Ginger struggled with despair and depression and wrestled with God, understandably, in her tragic loss. I'll let her tell you the details of her story, but I can tell you that proof of God's faithfulness is clear in Ginger's life and in the character and the integrity of her 5 amazing children. As our children continued in school together, Ginger and I were at many of the same events. However, our daughter was our last child in high school, and Ginger still had children in elementary school and middle school and high school and college, and Ginger always had children in all of the schools. Ginger was a soccer mom, a football mom, a volleyball mom, and now is a cheerleader mom. And somehow Ginger managed to balance life with 5 children as a working mother. She traveled frequently for speaking engagements, and she even wrote a book, for crying out loud. Although our paths looked very different, Ginger and I shared a common bond like so many of you. We were trying to love Jesus with everything we've got and be the best mamas we could be. I'm eager for you to get to know her, and I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Ginger Gilbert Ravella.
If I could wake up one day and be as classy and beautiful as Judy Kruger and have it together, I mean, wow. Yeah, and when I became a new cheerleader mom, is this good? Can y'all hear me? Okay, good. Very recently, my twins, my 13-year-olds, just made the cheer squad, and this was a whole new thing for them. We moved to Franklin, Tennessee, and they're all about, maybe we're going to do some different things here than we did in San Antonio. And so immediately I thought of Judy. I'm like, I need a tutorial from Judy Kruger on how to be a cheerleader mom, because she did it very well, as she does many things. So thank you for that. It is just such a privilege to be here. Like I said, we moved from San Antonio to Nashville, Tennessee last summer, and it's so sweet to be back. I said I stepped off the plane and back into the airport, and there was just a smell, that just smelled like home. And then I look around at the faces of all of these beautiful women and my mom who drove down from Lubbock, and it is home. It will always be home to me. There's something so sweet about the people and the ties. I have soul ties here that will never go away, but we're not going to start crying right out of the gate. So we'll do that later. But I do want to share a little bit of my story. Thank you to everyone, Holly and Judy and all the ladies that made this so beautiful and set the stage for what I hope is just a few moments that we can spend not as a speaker and an audience, but just as sisters in Christ, as if we were just around a kitchen table at home having a cup of coffee and just sharing about what the Lord has done in each of our lives, because I don't begin to think I'm the only one in this room with a story. And in fact, as this morning as I was praying about it, I said it's a little bit different. I usually speak to audience. I speak all over the country, but to audiences of strangers. And so to speak to all of these faces and know that I've lived a lot of life with them. And so it kind of changed what I was going to say today, a little bit of my message, because I know that they just represent to all of you and the things that the Lord has asked you to walk through. And so today we're going to discuss a military story, but it's also really God's story. I tell people, if it had just been my story, it certainly would have ended up very different. Probably, at the end of a dirt road in a bar somewhere. So praise God that he is a blessed controller of all things, and it didn't end that way. So yes, I married my college sweetheart, Troy Gilbert. He was the most handsome thing I'd ever seen. I met him in the school cafeteria at Angelo State University, and then we transferred to Tech after that. Married a week after college graduation, and he joined the Air Force. And he was the son of an Air Force enlisted man, and so he grew up in that world, but I did not. And I won't say I quickly adapted, but I adapted, and it became a part of who I was. The DNA of who I am today is because of the time and the people and the places that the Lord allowed me to be and meet. And they truly are, military families to me are some of the most amazing people I will ever know. And I have met presidents and first ladies and movie stars, and they are overcomers. They are selfless. They are doers. They're dreamers, and they're hopers. And I want to be a good steward of their stories too, and represent them well, especially the fallen military family. So I married Troy, and his dream of being an F-16 fighter pilot comes true, and we got to be married for 13 years, and in those 13 years, we moved 11 times to 2 countries, 4 states, and we had 5 children. So I don't sit around a lot. My mom can attest to that. She's always begging me to sit around a little bit more, but I said, there'll be a day for that. And so in the fall of 2006, Troy deployed to Iraq. And I remember right before he left, he wasn't supposed to deploy. We were at Luke Air Force Base in Phoenix, Arizona. He was an instructor pilot. He was also a presidential advance agent for President George Bush. And he was not supposed to go to combat on that tour. But his commander, who he was an executive aide for, was going to be the commander at Balad Air Base in Iraq, and he came to Troy and said, "You're my top pilot, and I really need you to go with me." And it was optional, I guess, as much as a general can make it optional. But I remember Troy and I talking, and he was about to leave, and he was standing in the door of our bedroom, and I looked at him and said, "What if something happens to you while you're gone? We're never going to forgive ourselves. Because you could have said no, right?" And he said, "First of all, I'm a fighter pilot. Nothing's going to happen to me," because that's their attitude. But he said, "But if it does, you will know without a doubt it was God's will." And I never thought about that conversation again until the morning of November 27th, 3 months later from that day that we said our tearful goodbyes. And I got a knock at the front door on a Monday morning. The boys were kindergarten and 2nd grade, and Bella was 3. She was jumping on the trampoline in the backyard at our home in Phoenix, the only home we ever owned together. And Aspen and Annalise were 9 months old, and they were down for a morning nap. And I thought that was kind of strange, who would be coming to my door. My girlfriend had come over faithfully every single Monday morning for that 3 months prior to wash dishes and do laundry and change diapers, and it was general chaos, and she helped me manage it. But basically we just stood in the backyard and drank Starbucks while our kids jumped on the trampoline. That was really all I needed. So I go to the front door and I see the sea of blue Air Force uniforms, and I knew that uniform well. Hung in my closet. For a split second I thought, I wonder what they're doing here. And then I looked at their faces, and as their eyes averted mine a little, I saw my commander's wife. And I knew her eyes were swollen and puffy, and she looked me straight in the eye, and I knew. And they came in to tell me that Troy and his F-16 had gone down in a combat mission west of Baghdad near Taji, Iraq, earlier that morning. And I don't remember much else that they said. I remember I kept saying over and over, we have 5 children, this isn't happening. As if saying those words over and over could somehow rewind the hours, the thousands of miles that separated Troy and I. And they told me that they had not been able to get into the crash site. The ground battles around that area were so fierce. There were IEDs everywhere. 2006 was a really, really bad year for our troops over there. And they said, we're going to come back as soon as we have more news. So in that time, friends and family started coming in. I remember my girlfriends just coming in. We were cleaning. I remember sweeping like I don't know, like I was going to sweep the devil right away. I swept and swept and swept, and I don't sweep a lot, so I don't know what that was about. And I remember I had some friends that were teachers, and they former teachers before they were military wives, and I remember they came in and just started organizing books and cleaning out clothes. I mean, everybody was just doing something. They showed up for me. Later that night, I would get a second knock at the front door, and they would tell me that I won't even say it was my worst fear came true, because it was a fear I didn't even ever dream of. But when they got into the crash site, hours later, the jet wreckage, Troy was gone. He was missing. Predator UAV film showed terrorists taking him, unharnessing him from the jet wreckage, from his seat, putting him in the back of a truck, and driving my beloved away. So I'm like, okay, I'm not sure what to do with that news. And they said, we are on an unprecedented manhunt, Ginger. We have sent Navy, Army, Air Force, Marines looking for him. We don't believe he could have survived the crash, because that was my worst fear, was that he would be a POW alive, suffering at the hands of the enemy. And so it took 5 days for his DNA, some skull fragments that were in the wreckage, to be sent back to Bethesda, Maryland, and cross-matched. And so he was positively identified. And they said there's no way he could have survived with that kind of skull fragments missing. And so we planned a funeral at Arlington National Cemetery. And I had 5 little people who were looking to me for answers, because you really can't ever script telling your kids that their daddy went home to be with Jesus. It's just not something you practice in all your scenarios. But the peace of Christ was present every day, on the worst days, the hardest moments, and the unthinkable scenarios that were laid out before me. I didn't tell my children that their father had been taken, because I really didn't know how to explain that kind of hate. I knew it would confuse them. And so we walked behind a full casket case on that December day in 2006. And I went back to my life, which didn't feel like much of a life. I always say they should actually call it a death, and not a life, because that's what it feels like after someone that you love is gone, after you've walked through a circumstance that you never thought that robs you of your dreams and your hopes and your plans. And like, you're really just walking back into a death and not a life, because you feel like your life is not there anymore. And so I faced a lot of, as Judy said, depression and anxiety and insomnia, horrible insomnia, and really and just prayed that the Lord would take us all home. And that wasn't who I was. I was like the fun, happy girl all the time. Like, I could see the best situation and scenario in everything. I loved life. I loved people. I loved adventure. I loved Jesus. And Lord, why? Why us? Troy was a Christian fighter pilot. He was witnessing to men who did not always necessarily think they needed anything but themselves. We were raising godly kids. We were in church. He had the welcome ministry. We taught parenting classes. I mean, we were doing the thing that God asked us to do. And so it got confusing. Like, Lord, you say you love me and serve me and follow me, and we did that. And then didn't you owe us that? Just that. Safety, security. You're letting guys come home from combat who, they're not good dads. They're bad husbands. They're cheating on their wives. They're doing what? Like, really? Why him? Why us? And I wrestled, and then finally, one day when I was like still there, after praying, like, Lord, come on, take us home. I'm sorry, my mom hates it when I talk about this, so normally she's not here. But one day I woke up and I'm like, all right, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? And yes, raising kids was my primary calling. But I felt him say, I have more for you. I have something else for you. Your mission is not finished. Troy's was. Never understand it. His was. And mine wasn't. Matthew 17:20 says, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, nothing will be impossible. One day I was reading that verse and I looked up, how big is a mustard seed actually? Oh, I forgot to set my timer. Oh, mercy. That just occurred to me. Okay, we're just going to wing it. See? Holy Spirit. Okay. I looked up how big is a mustard seed. And it's actually a third the size of a poppy seed. We all know how big a poppy seed is. Okay, so cut that little poppy seed into thirds, and that's how big a mustard seed is. And I think the Lord is telling all of us, I'm not asking for you to have that much faith. Just a smidge. I'll do the rest. I'll make up the difference. Just have that. Come before me on your hands and your knees and your face and bring me that mustard seed. And so that's what I gave him, because that's about all I had. And he took it and he grew it into what I really feel like is a firmly planted tree today. Because now it's been a long time. It's been 13 years. And in all of the searching and praying and desperation, there was a lot of waiting. And I don't know if you're in that place today where you're waiting. You're waiting on an answer. You're waiting on healing. You're waiting to just know your next step. And so what do we do in the waiting? You trust him. And I had a hard time with that for a while. Like, really, are you that trustworthy? Because you let me down, God. He says trust him and trust his promises and trust who he is. I went back to the very basics of my Sunday school teachings. Who is God? Who does he say he is? He is love. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He's the Alpha, the Omega. He's our Father. And you can choose the truth, his promises, 700 promises in the Word about his character. Or you can be ruled by your feelings, by anxiety, by resentment, by unforgiveness, by ingratitude, by disappointment. It's a choice sometimes, all the time. And it's a daily choice. I didn't just make it one time. You can choose to be bitter, or you can choose to be better. Troy's family has chosen the other route. And I see all the grandmothers here, and I miss that they're not in my kids' lives even hardly anymore. They lost their son, but they lost so much more because they have been ruled by those things: resentment, anxiety. They've let the darkness engulf them. We all lost the same person. Very different, husband, father, son, very different. But you start off in this boat together, and then eventually you're like, we had to go one way or the other. And if being mad brought Troy back, I can tell you I'd be mad all day long. All day. But it doesn't. It doesn't. So sometimes we accept the suffering like Christ. If God let his own son suffer for the glory of the kingdom, then who am I to say that I shouldn't suffer? Just being a follower of Christ. So I think that you should get to meet Troy. That's kind of always my thing, when I meet new people and I try to talk about who he was. It's hard to describe. He's kind of like Tom Cruise and George Strait and I don't know. I won't say Billy Graham because I know he's like Billy Graham. But, he loved Jesus. He loved his family. And 3 days before he died, I actually got to talk to him on the phone. And he said, hey, I made a video of myself for the kids for Christmas, and I put it in the mail. He said, now do not open it before Christmas. I know you. And I was so excited to get that. 3 days later, he's gone. The box is somewhere between Iraq and Phoenix. In between the day of finding out and the day of finding out for sure that it was him, that 5 days of waiting, the mailman delivers this box with Troy's writing to my family. So I opened it up, and there's this little bitty videotape, the little camcorder. And so I had a friend just take a little snippet of it. We watched it eventually. It took me over a year. But I had him take a little snippet of it because I said, I want people to hear Troy's words. I want them to see his spirit. And it was a beautiful thing for my children, of course, to have it. It was an hour and a half in total of him talking and reading Bible stories right before Christmas. So we have him every year. He can read us the Christmas story. Prayed for the kids. We listened to that prayer. I hadn't listened to the prayer piece of it until this Christmas, and we sat around as a family because it was just us. Nashville, Tennessee, we're far away, and it was sweet because Troy moved there with us. But anyway, so if we can play, I'd like just a couple of minutes. I'd love for you to see it.
I can't be with you this Christmas, and it breaks my heart. I miss you guys. I love you very much, and know that I'm there with you in spirit. I love you, and I miss you, and I wish I was drinking your hot cider right now, and in your arms. And kids, I wish I was there to help you open the presents and give you a big hug and a kiss, and I can't. So I will, and by the time you're watching this, though, be home pretty soon because already it's like Thanksgiving in about 4 days. It's Saturday right now. I'm about to go fly. I'm going in late because I'm going to go fly this afternoon, but pretty soon it'll be Thanksgiving here this next week, and then by the time you watch this, it'll be Christmas, and I'll be home probably in about 2 weeks after that. So it's getting quick. It's going by quick, and I look forward to getting home. I can't wait to get home. I know it's going to be just a couple more weeks before I'm there. So I will stay safe, and I will stay healthy, and I want you guys to do the same. And this is probably the last time I'm going to end it up here because I'm going to get this tape in the mail for you so that it gets there by Christmas. Ginger, you might remember we've been given the deadlines to get stuff mailed out for Christmas, so hopefully this will do it. I love you guys, and I can't wait to see you. Bye.
Wasn't he cute? In 2013, I got a phone call from the general that Troy was with, and he said, I need you to come to my office. I have something to tell you. We were here. He was at Randolph, General Rand, and he was the commander of AETC. And so we just went into his office, and he said, I need you to know that an Iraqi has turned in some of Troy's toe bones to the Jordanian embassy. It happened a year ago. We have been relentlessly searching for him ever since, because obviously when we left Iraq, it became much more difficult, the manhunt, to find him without the manpower there. And he said, but we've turned up no leads after a year, so we decided we wanted you to know we have them, and we wanted you to be able to make a decision about what to do with them. And so I said, well, we will be going back to Arlington. And at that point, I'd made some really beautiful friends who walked with me the road from Texas to DC. And I was talking to the medical examiner because I really wanted to understand a little bit better, like, what is exactly buried at Arlington, because now my children are understanding and asking questions. And he said, well, ma'am, from the first crash, we have about 60 paper clips worth of skull fragments from the top of Troy's head, which is about the hardest place of your skull. And he said, now we have some toe bones. And I said, well, what? He said, well, the toes bones that are underneath your toenails. That's what we have, either when they drug him, because they would take him and move his body. It was a war trophy to Iraqi tribal leaders, and, you know, like, look what we've done to America kind of thing. And of course, they always, So in that moving, somehow somebody had gotten the toe bones, and but I said, underneath the toenail, and he goes, yeah, it's like the very tip of your toes. And I sat there for a moment, and I just started weeping. And I said, so you're telling me all I have is the very top of his head and the very tip of his toes? And he said, yes, ma'am. And I said, well, I believe that that's a message from the Lord, that he has the rest of him, and I don't need to worry. And he didn't know what to say. But I had a peace in 2013 when we went back to Arlington that I had not had previously. Like, the Lord is saying, I told you I have him. He is mine. He's not yours. And I realized, like, I looked around at my friends and the people that were there 7 years later, that were still holding us close. I'm like, Lord, you've had all of us too. And so even when you don't realize he has you, he has you. In 2008, I met another fighter pilot. We were still in Phoenix, the kids and I. He was at Randolph. And his name was Colonel Jim Ravella, also a fighter pilot. People are like, are you joking? You married another fighter pilot? I said, well, I watched a lot of Top Gun when I was about 13. So that is all I can attribute it to. He had lost his beautiful wife, Andrea, to breast cancer. A 4.5-year battle. He was very familiar with suffering. How we met is really cool. Someone asked me today, but it's in the book. But it's a sweet story. But I'll say enough to tell you this part of it. It was an email that I had received from a friend of a friend after Troy died. Andrea was still alive. My friend didn't know what to say to me, which I tell people all the time. If you're trying to help somebody, all you have to say is, I'm so sorry, I don't know what to say to you, but I'm here. That's all you got to do. And she just emailed me. She wasn't physically able to be with me. She lived states away. But she said, I don't know what to say, but maybe this would help. I don't know. It's just someone that suffered who's been faithful. And that's what I saw in that email. I couldn't piece it all together, didn't know who they were, never thought I would meet them. But it was a couple, and she was suffering, and they were faithful. And it said in that, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were thrown into the fiery furnace, that even if God doesn't save us, we will still worship him. That helped me. That email from a stranger helped me pivot just a little bit to go, I'm not the first person that suffered, but when we're suffering, we feel like we're the first one, right? Like, no one's ever been through this before. I'm like, no, they were in the fire because of their faith. And they said, our God can save us, but even if he doesn't, we still love him. So I remembered that email, and it ended up being a string of emails. Can y'all hear me okay? Did that fall? Is it my imagination? Yeah, I kind of feel like that fell. When did that happen? I'm sorry. I feel like I'm like, should I be going like this? Okay, that was weird. Anyway, we emailed back and forth, this couple and me, for a year. Maybe once a month, twice a month. Nothing really personal, theology, life, death, things. They prayed for me, I prayed for them. And then as God would have it, he would take Jim's beautiful Andrea home, and we would end up meeting. We had a handful of dates. I moved to Randolph, I moved to San Antonio, Texas, and married this sort of a little bit of a stranger, but in another way, my soul knew him. And we both looked at each other like, we have no idea what we're doing, but we're going to do it together. And he has been an angel and an answer to a million prayers that were prayed for me. And he adopted all of my children on Memorial Weekend in New Braunfels at the courthouse in 2009. And he does a great job of being their dad, but allowing them to still have Troy as their dad, too. I wish he were here. So in 2016, I was at a volleyball tournament in Bernie with Bella, and my phone rang, and it was Jim, and he said, hey, I'm going to come meet you where, And I was like, what do you mean you're going to come meet me? I thought you weren't coming till later. And he goes, no, I'm just going to come go ahead and grab you. Where are you going to be? And I'm like, well, I'm going to Starbucks with some other moms because we're on a break in between games. And he said, okay, just what Starbucks are you going to be at? And I'll meet you there. And I'm like, wow, he misses me. And he pulled up, and I saw his face, and I thought two things. Something's happened to my son in college. Something's happened to my parents. Because the look on his face was like something had transpired. And he said, you need to call General Rand, who had left and was not here anymore. And I did, and General Rand said, Ginger, they found Troy. 10 years later. 10 years of praying, waiting, hoping, believing, trusting, laying it down, picking it up. And I would find out the heroic, amazing Hollywood mission that happened in the middle of the night, thousands of miles away, where men would risk their lives to find their brother. And you want to know who found him? That same special ops unit that he saved 10 years prior. Because they never forgot. And that's the men and women that serve in our military. Yeah. They never forgot. And so we go back to Arlington for the third time. Last week I was Googling something, I don't know what, and it was like one of those trivia websites or something, and it popped up, who is the only soldier to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery 3 times? It said Major Troy Gilbert. I'm like, well, he's a big deal. He's a big deal. But this time was, wow. You know what it was? It was God's extravagant love for me and for my kids, for his parents. So don't doubt that God's love for you is extravagant. because he didn't have to do that for me. He'd already given me 2013, like, peace, acceptance. But he wanted me to know I'm never finished. Till you come home and meet me and you're at my front door in heaven, I am never finished working in your life. So hold fast. Don't give up. John 16:33 says, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. He's overcome your world. You just don't know it yet. So we go back to Arlington and we walk up those beautiful hills there, dotted with the white headstones, following the caisson with the coffin with Troy's body fully in it. And I looked behind me and the kids, and there were 400 people walking that path, that road. And half of them did not even know Troy ever. They knew his story. They knew our family. It was beautiful. I will never forget that as long as I live. That you can truly come alongside someone in their pain and just show up for them. They'll never forget it. I promise. So, I want to close with a few pictures. Let me see here. Let's see if I do this. Okay, this is a really cool story. I love pictures. So, after the crash, one of Troy's pilot friends walked the fields looking for just whatever they could find, things that were in the wreckage. They were scattered the way that he crashed. He'd taken out an insurgent truck, and then on his second pass, his tail clipped the ground, and so he was propelled forward. And so a lot of the wreckage was scattered a mile away. So I get a box from General Rand, probably 4 years. It had been sitting in a JAG office, in a lawyer's office, for the accident investigation. And it was of these things that I didn't even know existed that were found. And one of them was a camera that was melted almost beyond recognition of even being a camera. And in it was a memory card. And when I pulled out the memory card, that memory card was pristine. Like you went and bought it at Walgreens and stuck it in this melted plastic mess. And this photo was on that memory card, and I had never seen it. Some of the pictures I had already seen because he had downloaded them and sent them to me from his time there. But this one was taken a week before the crash. It's dated a week before the crash. I was like, he's so progressive. It was a selfie before there were selfies. He was on a Sherpa. I remember him telling me about this flight. They had flown to, I believe, a Marine base. And he and General Rand had met the troops. And General Rand told me, hey, we were being shot at. You know that when he was taking that picture. He said, we ended up having to hit the deck. And he said, they sat up. And he said, you know what your husband looked at me? Major Troy Gilbert looked at me and said to his general commanding officer, he said, sir, I haven't seen you at the chapel lately. He said, Troy, I'm busy running a war. I mean, come on. And then Troy said to him, the firing had ceased and they're kind of able to like breathe again, you know. He said, well, aren't you glad I've been going? So that was that day. But what a sweet thing, right? Look at the peace in his eyes. And like, that's the peace of a man who is very literally at war in that moment. But that's what the Lord can do for you. You may be at war right now. Spiritual, physical, emotional. You can have peace in the middle of it. This was the recovery when we went to Dover to meet Troy's final homecoming. men carrying him so carefully. They shifted their body weight as they went down the ramp so that he was always level. He was always level, and that's when I look at my beautiful table of friends who have kept me level. Yeah. I love that picture. There's the caisson. We were behind it. Those blessed 400 people were behind us. And that's Jim. Probably one of my favorite pictures of all time. Jim saluting Troy's casket, all the while Facebook live streaming, filming it on his cell phone, because that's Jim, because he's a multitasker. Troy's wingman was refueling the day of the crash, so Troy was alone doing that mission. But he's never been alone. This has been Troy's wingman, Jim Ravella. I love that. There's my kids. They're now 21, 19, 15, and the twins are 13. And they're amazing, and they love the Lord, and they're whole and healthy, and that is only by God's grace. And so this is Jim and I, and his two boys. One of them is married. So this is the whole modern-day Brady bunch behind me. I'll leave that up there because I like that picture. It hasn't been easy. None of it. But it's been worth it. We were talking about last night at dinner with some of my friends, isn't it hard to get up and retell your story? And yes, it is. But in another way, there's healing that happens, even in the pain. So remember that. Whatever you're walking through, there can still be healing in the pain. A friend of mine, Christy Purifoy, wrote a book called Roots in Sky, and I love this. It's about the seasons, the physical seasons, the emotional seasons, the spiritual seasons that we all walk through. And she's a beautiful gardener, and she says this as she looks out into, I've been there, she has a beautiful farm in Amish country in Pennsylvania. And she writes this: "This is not my first spring, and here is something I know. The day which the daffodils emerge is not the day for hope. The day when the seedlings show the bright green of new life is not the day for faith. That day came and went. Hope is for the dark days, the days when all you can see is mud and mess. Those are the days when miracles really begin." I love that. I love that. So I want to thank you for having me. This has been just the sweetest blessing. Thank you, Judy and Holly, for letting me be a part of such a beautiful gathering of ladies. And I want to leave you with this. There is a love 1,000 times as strong as any pain we've ever known. The love of Christ. And I hope that as you walk out of here today and you walk back into whatever you left behind to come here, that you feel that love and you remember that it is 1,000 times stronger than any pain that you're feeling. So may God bless you. Keep praying for our troops. They need it. Pray for their families. Pray for those who are wounded, whose battles are raging on. I love that I get to be an advocate for all of them. So may God bless you, and may God bless whatever your mission is today. Thank you.